It's the Growing for Market podcast.
Flower Farming for Profit, my editor actually suggested that title, and I love it because in some ways it might be a tiny bit controversial, but I'm here to fight anyone who trolls me. That's fine with me, because it's true. It's like, what's the good thing about taking such good care of our soil and building an employee culture that we can really get behind and kind of doing our little part to change the world by going against the grain and being farmers if we can't sustain those farms and keep farming for the rest of our careers or as long as we want to. And unless we're focused on building the business and focusing on profit, we'll never get there. And, I come from this deep organic agriculture background. So all of those things, all the value heavy components of a farm, I take those as a given. We're all doing the best we can is what I'm going to assume, but we need to make money too, so we can keep doing it.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine. For 32 years, the only magazine devoted solely to flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. I am so excited to welcome Bootstrap Farmer as a sponsor of the podcast. I've known them for a dozen years, and if anyone tells you nothing is made in the USA anymore, well, they're headquartered and warehoused in Paris, Texas. They make their own all-metal, all-inclusive greenhouse frames of steel made in the USA and fabricated in Texas, and their heavy-duty, reusable propagation and microgreens trays are Midwest-made. With a complete range of supplies, they have just about everything for propagation and growing, including heat mats, ground cover, frost blankets, silage tarps, irrigation, and trellising. Want to color code your seed starting flats? They've got heavy-duty trays that will last for years in a full range of colors. Great for keeping farm seedlings separate from retail or just for fun. And they have an experienced team of growers to support everything they sell. If you've heard of the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative providing grants for hoop houses, but have been put off by the paperwork, Bootstrap Farmer has a guide that will walk you through the application process so you can get your hoop house funded this winter. For all that and more, check out Bootstrap Farmer at bootstrapfarmer.com. There's a lot of talk these days about the value of certification. With the growing distrust of labels and customers who are more savvy than ever, farmers need better options to showcase their commitment to truly sustainable growing practices. Certified Naturally Grown is a peer review certification focused on the highest ideals of the organic movement. They keep costs low and paperwork to a minimum, so you can keep focused on farming. CNG's peer-to-peer approach encourages knowledge exchange and strengthens regional networks. See why farmers throughout North America are choosing Certified Naturally Grown and apply today at naturallygrown.org. Today on the show, we have the pleasure of talking with Lennie Larkin. Lenny is a flower grower and the owner of B-Side Farm, which was in California but is now outside of Portland, Oregon. She is also the author of the brand new book, Flower Farming for Profit, the complete guide to growing a successful cut flower business. It is a 259-page smackdown on everything you need to know about running a flower business. It's great. I just got done reading it. She has also taught at Santa Rosa Junior College in California and served multiple terms on the board of the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. Through her research and educational business, Flower Farming for Profit, she teaches a business curriculum that she developed specifically for flower farmers, provides coaching and business advising, and conducts grant-funded research on cut flower cost of production and efficiency. The book is so new that it won't even be out until sometime in January 2024, but we're talking about it now because I know the months from November to February are prime reading and planning times for farmers. So I wanted to go ahead and get this book on everyone's radar screens now. I have had my hands full and really enjoyed reading my review copy this past week. There's just so much information in the book. It really is a blueprint for how to set up and run a flower business. If you are thinking about getting into the game, pre-order it now at the website, growingformarket.com. We'll send you a copy as soon as we get ours from the publisher in January. And speaking as someone who has run a business and a farm business for a while now, I think a lot of established farmers could also learn a lot about how to get more profitable and where to focus your efforts from a book like this. It really covers everything from planning to operating a flower business, just running down the table of contents. It covers taking stock of your resources, researching your market, flower sales channels, floral design and weddings, business planning, projections, and goal setting, crop planning, cut flower pricing, crop profitability and cost of production, farm bookkeeping, leases, legal considerations, grants, and financing, record keeping, building your team, marketing, and growth strategies, all with meaningful anecdotes from Lenny's experiences peppered throughout. If you've been running a flower business for 30 years and have it all dialed in, you may not need this book, but I can see pretty much everyone else benefiting from this book. So listen to the interview, pre-order your copy at growingformarket.com, where Growing for Market magazine subscribers always get 20% off all the books we sell. It's a really great book, and we appreciate when you buy it from us or your local bookstore. Let's face it, Jeff Bezos does not need another rocket ship, and buying the book from us helps us put out more free content like this podcast. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Lenny.
Thank you. Hi, Andrew. It's so great to be here. I am the biggest Growing for Market fan. I haven't even quite had the opportunity to tell you that, but I meant to go fish out my old binders of like Growing for Market magazine. It's so nerdy that I have them all kept that way, but I'm such a fan, and I'm so glad you started this podcast. And yeah, I'm honored to be here with you today. Truly.
That's so awesome. Thank you, Lenny. And well, that's why we 3-hole punch them, because we hope people will hang on to them and keep benefiting them. Of course, now we have the archive and people can do it digitally too. But I don't think we've ever met, Lenny, but it's fun for me to do this interview because I don't know if you remember this, but back at an EcoFarm conference in California, probably in 2017 or 2018, I went to a talk of yours where you mentioned that you had gone to one of my greenhouse talks at the same conference earlier that morning. I think your talk was about using social media for flower marketing or something like that. But I was like, yay, I got a flower person to come to one of my greenhouse talks, which are all about vegetable greenhouse growing, which wasn't really the goal. I would love it if I could find somebody to write a greenhouse flower book. If you know anybody, let us know, Lenny, because I definitely don't have the skills with flowers to write the same thing about greenhouses that I did with vegetables, but it was gratifying anyway. And I think that's when you really came on my radar screen, and that was fun.
Yeah.
Actually, right at the beginning of the book, you talk about giving a talk years ago and say, quote, if I had the chance to go back, I'd boldly announce the primary goal of flower farming business, the 4-letter word profit. Sales without profit are meaningless, and I now question the value of a passion-fueled business that you can't sustain. And I feel like you putting that right up front of your book is super important because the difference between farming and gardening is the need to make a profit.
Yeah. Right.
If you're a gardener and you want to spend $10 to grow a dahlia, that's great. That's all your business. And we don't frown on that. But, growing for market is really for market gardeners, market farmers, people who are trying to run a business. And so, I think there is this weird dynamic in farming where it is supposed to be a passion driven industry, or a lot of times it is. Like you make that point in the book where people don't get into flower farming because they love spreadsheets. They get into flower farming because they love flowers.
Yeah.
But I feel like if they don't get good with the spreadsheets, they're not going to stay in it. And so I like the fact that I think your book is helping to not make profit a 4-letter word anymore.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And we, originally I thought the name of the book might be The Business of Flower Farming. And I was throwing around titles like that. It took me forever to find a title. My aunt suggested Flowabunga. And so that was, a contender. But Aunt Margaret, that's for you. But yeah, Flower Farming for Profit, my editor actually suggested that title. And I love it because in some ways it might be a tiny bit controversial, but like I'm here to fight anyone who trolls me. That's fine with me because it's true. It's like, what's the good thing about taking such good care of our soil and building an employee culture that we can really get behind and kind of doing our little part to change the world by going against the grain and being farmers if we can't sustain those farms and keep farming for the rest of our careers or as long as we want to. And unless we're focused on building the business and focusing on profit, we'll never get there. And, I come from this like deep organic agriculture background. So all of those things, all the like value heavy components of a farm, I take those as a given, like we're all doing the best we can is what I'm going to assume. but we need to make money too, so we can keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because whatever, like the common motivations that I feel like I see in farmers are just the love for the plants or wanting to be a good steward of their particular piece of the earth. Well, you can't keep doing that if you don't stay in business. And so I think, as you know, Lynn Basinski started the magazine Growing for Market over 30 years ago. And I feel like at the beginning, a lot of the information was just on how to grow the crops, right? And then I feel like there was almost like a second wave once people had the market farming scene was growing and people were getting pretty good at growing stuff. There was this marketing revolution almost of talking about how to pilot high and watch it fly and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like your book is part of almost like the third wave. That's like, we got a lot of information on growing, we got information on marketing, and now it's time to really become business people, both so we can take good care of our part of the earth and also take care of ourselves. Because like you talk about in the book, if you don't have any plan for how to retire, if you don't make enough money, you can't pay a decent living wage to your crew that is going to work so hard and help you. So it's a really important topic. And I think what you've done is a really good thing with the taking stock of your resources section at the beginning of the book. So potential flower farmers can really get an idea of what they would need to get started. Even if it makes people pause in their farming journey and say, work for another year to raise enough money, or wait until they can buy or at least get a long-term lease on a piece of property, since no one wants to invest in fertilizer and perennials, etc., and then lose their land. It's a lot better than to have people rush in with that enthusiasm only to realize they didn't have enough money or land in the first place to support what they want to do and then fail. That's one of the things that you do talk about in the book, is being able to sustain the passion. The passion is what gets us going, but it's the business know-how and making a profit that's going to keep it going. On that tip, you say, many flower farmers begin on leased land, build a financially sustainable business, and then purchase land once they can afford it and know what type and size of plot they need for their operation. This is usually only possible if you already have savings from elsewhere. It's a lot to ask of a small farm to raise enough money for a land purchase. You say, this is my exact situation for my own operation, B-Side Farm. I farmed for 10 years and learned exactly what I needed, saving money all the while from teaching and garden design in addition to farming. I finally bought a farm of my own in 2022. I had to move from California to Oregon to afford the purchase, essentially starting the business over, but that's a story for another book. So since we have more time here, can you tell us a bit about your farm journey, where you learned to farm, and where you taught before writing the book?
Totally, yeah. So I'm an East Coaster. I grew up in Boston, actually, and spent summers working in Maine. I love Maine. I miss Maine. I'm devastated for Lewiston right now, by the way. My brother used to live there. But I grew up in Boston, and in high school, I thought I was going to be a farmer. It's like what I wanted to do. I spent a few summers like working at farm stands and stuff. And then my plans changed. I wanted to, I don't know, I thought working for like an international nonprofit was going to be my biggest contribution to the world and like personally fulfilling. And so, I went to college and went the liberal arts route, and then worked as an educator teaching ESL. I worked in Brazil for a year for a translation company. I came back and worked with Brazilians in Boston on getting increased access for food stamps, basically, in Massachusetts for immigrants, and this complex nature of families with kids who had been born in the US, but parents who were undocumented. And so kind of like getting through all that bureaucracy to get people benefits that they're entitled to. Interestingly, and that led me into more kind of social work and education. So that's what I was doing in Boston for a few years. And then I had sort of like a very early, I don't know if it was a midlife crisis. I was in my 20s, but it felt like it. It felt like, what am I doing? I was living and working in Boston. I never really meant to return to Boston. And I was like, this isn't me. This isn't what I want to be doing. I don't want to be putting on these like business casual clothes. I mean, I was probably wearing jeans and like a nice shirt, but still, it wasn't Carhartts, let's say. And I just felt so unfulfilled. And it was sad because I found the work that I was doing to be really important. I was eventually working in refugee resettlement, but I just was so miserable. I also have dealt with depression, and I feel like that's something important to talk about, and a great reason to get into farming, quite honestly. Farming has grounded me and kept me in the moment like nothing else ever has. And so I needed a change. I was like, what am I doing? I've always thought about farming but I kind of assumed that everyone who was like sort of a hippie like also thought about farming. And then one day I realized that wasn't true and I should be farming. So I kind of like left everything behind and moved to California to do the CASFIS program at UC Santa Cruz. And the cool thing is that like it's interesting because I mean that program is changing face, but it's, you know, it's a place of privilege to be able to drop your life and go study farming for 6 months. I was able to use an AmeriCorps stipend from a past job, which is amazing. So I mean, these days it's interesting. I'm all about grants and getting people funding however we can. And looking back on how that was able to start my farming career is interesting. But so, yeah, I did the Santa Cruz program and then I worked there as like an instructor, a second year apprentice for a year. And then I moved up to Sonoma County to run a nonprofit, mostly vegetable farm called Petaluma Bounty, which is kind of like a CASFIS legacy, and managed production there for 3 years, you know, teaching people how to farm, getting food out to people, to low-income families in town, and growing flowers on the side. And each year that I ran that farm, we grew more and more flowers and sold them at the farmer's market. And I started connections with local florists selling wholesale. And then my incredible boss, Susie Grady, who's still the program manager there, was like, you know, this wasn't really supposed to be a flower farm. I know it's contributing in a lot of ways, but like, let's see how we can bring it back to vegetables. So I started B-Side on the side. And that was like 2013, 2014 maybe, and grew from there. So I was able to jump in and take over those kind of contracts I'd started with a few local florists, not contracts, but just sales relationships, and build from there. So I was just one of those crazy, you know, I was in my early 30s, I guess. I was like waking up early to farm my farm on leased land and then going to work to farm the other farm and then coming home and farming the first farm. And it's just like, oh my God, I cannot even imagine that now. I cannot imagine that.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Start 2024 off right with Local Line. Local Line is the all-in-one sales platform for direct market farms and food hubs. Increase your sales and streamline your processes with features including e-commerce, inventory management, subscriptions, online payments, and more. Trusted by thousands of farmers across North America, Local Line is the platform you need to take your farm to the next level. Subscriptions start as low as $39 per month. Try Local Line today and receive a free premium feature for 1 year and receive 15% off Local Line's marketing services using the coupon code GROWINGFORMARKET. That coupon code is GROWING, the number 4, market, growing for market, all one word, for 15% off Local Line's marketing services and 1 free premium feature for a year at Local Line. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. And now, back to the show.
So that's how it got started. And that's how B-Side was born in Sonoma County. And I grew it there over about, like, I think 8-9 years, selling every which way, doing weddings, selling wholesale, and eventually pivoting to selling retail and then bringing it all back to education too. And being like, I'm an educator at heart. Now I'm a farmer and I love farming. How can I combine this all? And it's just funny because we wear so many hats as small business owners, and a lot of farmers don't enjoy that, right? They don't enjoy learning about business. It turns out I loved it and I would have had no idea. And it's funny because now I think I'm known, if I'm known at all, I think it's for being sort of like this capitalist farmer or something. But I'm just shocked at how much adding the sort of the game of commerce and marketing, but mostly business strategy, how much it enhanced my experience as a farmer and how much I enjoyed it and was able to get my farm ahead. And then just, I've kind of seen that as my mission, is to take my enthusiasm for those concepts and translate them into the flower farming space and maybe the small farming space and help people do better on their farms.
That was a good answer. And I was interested because I didn't know what your background was. And I was reading the book. I was thinking you had a background in business or something like that because it's just so pragmatic. And, one of the things I love about it is I'm a very visual person. And so sometimes I was reading what I was supposed to be understanding, but you have so many charts and things in there that just make it.
I love the chart.
Yeah. The charts are fantastic because they just help. They put it in a very what might be several paragraphs worth of an explanation. You just be like, oh, with this little change, you make that much more money. You're like, okay, I get it. So is that how you got the name B-Side? Because it was on the side?
That and just like the B-side of a record. So it was sort of my side. For a minute, I was like, is it Side Piece Farm? That felt kind of controversial. So B-side, yeah. I used to play more music than I do now before I became a farmer, but it's important to me. So it's kind of like, the other farm, like the undiscovered gem, the B-side, that kind of thing. But yeah, I kind of became a small farm business expert, really, because it's taken a while for me to feel confident saying that, but I'm like, that's the best way to describe what I work on right now. I just started realizing that I needed answers that I was having trouble finding within our industry. There's certainly tons of farmers who have these skills. I'm not saying these skills don't exist in the industry, but most of those farmers are too busy to write a book. They're running huge farms. Like, they're never going to write a book. So I was like, okay, maybe it's my contribution back to our industry that I've learned so much from is to take a step back. Before I even decided to write the book, I was like, let me go take business management courses. So I was taking classes through like Harvard Extension in the winter. I took a farm coaching class from Julia Shanks, who is wonderful. We're actually doing a few book tour events together this winter, which is awesome because a second edition of her book came out.
Julia's great.
So awesome. Taught me so much. And so took that with her, and then a few other business courses. I was, already teaching in the Hort department at Santa Rosa Junior College, and then I was set up to begin teaching in the ag business department. But then I moved. So yeah, and then I did this business program through Goldman Sachs, where I went to Babson College back in Boston, oddly, like 2 times over the winter of, it was 2017 or something, and it was basically like an entrepreneurship course that lasted all fall, and we got to network and learn from people across all industries. So the people in my little group, like one was like a, cleaning supply warehouser, and someone else ran family pools. It was like all other industries. And I was so out of my league. Like, they were all so comfortable with their numbers. I was just learning all that stuff. But it really showed me how sort of like business is business, and there's so many principles that we can apply to small farms that we don't talk about. And it's not, for the most part, like rocket science. It's a specific mentality, a specific way of kind of shutting out the noise, especially on crazy farms, and knowing how to be strategic and make decisions that aren't based on emotion or overwhelm, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that tip, what can you tell us about your farm numbers? I know you said that you enjoy being an open book, because I don't find that many people do that, which goes back to some weirdness about profit.
Yeah.
Seems like most other industries are like, huzzah, we're making a profit. And whereas, there's this weirdness about profit in farming. I don't know if it's, maybe some people think they'll be judged if they're not making enough money or too much money, or I don't even know where it comes from, but it is a weird dynamic that is in farming.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about your own farm's numbers that just might benefit the people that are out there listening?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I started thinking about how people in our industry really don't talk about numbers. And I remember one time being at a farm event in Texas and running into this farmer older than me, this kind of veteran farmer in our industry. And I was like, oh, are you still farming? And he said something like, yeah, I shut it down a little bit, or I condensed my farm, but I'm still, this year I did 80 grand and he in gross sales. He might have said that, but it was that's what he implied. And it was like, it wasn't even the fact of what number it was that stood out to me. It was the fact that that's how he described to me what his farm looks like. And of course, there's so many other variables that go into describing a farm. But flower farm, like newer flower farmers that I might have met would have been like, oh, I sell through a CSA and I sell to florists and I sell to blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, okay, cool. But, if we were really trying to talk, I would want to know, like, is this a full-time thing for you? Do you have a team? What kind of numbers are you grossing or netting? Because that's just the context that helps us understand what we're looking at. And it's all kind of shrouded in mystery. And so I was like, okay, this guy does 80 grand in sales. That gives me a sense of like what his farm is doing. Anyway, so my farm, it's funny because I've been doing a lot of writing or at least Instagram posting. I finally started an Instagram account to go along with the book and my teaching and stuff, which is Flower Farming for Profit. So I've had actually a fun time on Instagram recently, which is a crazy thing to say because social media is the worst, but I've had a fun time creating little graphics and trying to just get little businessy concepts across to people. And I have been doing a lot of writing and thinking about like very small flower farms, which is funny because that's not necessarily what I promote. And those are not necessarily my people. Like I feel like my people are like this flower farming industry of slightly larger farms, and mine has always been an outlier. So my farm has always been less than an acre. I've leased more space than that at certain times, but then had breakdowns and been like, let's condense back down. But, over all those years of kind of expanding, doing a lot of wholesale, learning what was going to work for me to sell wholesale, then kind of niching back down, of course, pivoting during COVID and selling more retail and opening up a farm stand. Through all that, I was able to really pinpoint what worked and what didn't work and make my farm smaller and smaller to the point where I was 3/4 of an acre. So it was like a 1/4 acre of annuals and then a 1/2 acre of mostly peonies and grossing over $200,000, which 220 to up to 250 at one point. And a lot of that was from value added stuff. So it's obviously so hard to compare row crop flowers or veggies sold wholesale to weddings or something. But, at the end of the day, like 130 of that was coming from my farm stand, which I marketed the hell out of. Like that's how I was able to grow it to have such great sales. It was also in a great location, which I paid for. I paid $500 a month or so to like lease this location, but it made sense. And I marked up my flowers 3 times. So wholesale dahlia was $1 that I would have sold it for. I would make it into a bouquet and sell it for $3. Certainly not every location can do that, but I'm a designer. I know how to make things look good. So I was able to kind of like, it sounds so nickel and dimey, but we were able to make beautiful bouquets that the perceived value was there, and I was like one of the most expensive games in town and I would get some crap for that, but that's okay by me because I think farmers need to charge more. But so all to say, through like half of my sales or a little over half being value added, at one point it was weddings, but by the end I dropped down to weddings. I was able to make that kind of money. And it's hard to say exactly what my profit margin was. I think in the aggregate, somewhere around like 40%, which is pretty high. I think most farms, should assume that net profit margins are going to be more like 30%. But there's so many different caveats to how people are accounting for that and what you're expensing and what you're not expensing. So it's hard to really wrap your head around like comparing net profit numbers. But I know a lot of not a lot, I know a handful of really small kind of like micro farms who are doing a lot of value added stuff and are now also like selling bulbs or tubers to other flower farmers or gardeners, kind of taking advantage of their marketing savvy or whatever. I don't really have that, and they're reporting higher profit margins, and I question how sustainable some of those businesses are over the long term, because I think these people aren't necessarily all accounting for their labor. And so once you have to hire and help, that profit looks really different. And I learned that as I left my farm to go do some teaching to help build a philanthropic flower farm on this estate in Sonoma, which is like how I was able to save more money and eventually buy my farm. So yeah, those were my numbers. I think more generally, and I say this in the book, I think most flower farmers who have been in business for a while and are doing well and are selling some combination of wholesale and maybe some retail are going to be bringing in more like 60 to 80 grand an acre, like somewhere around that. So my farm doesn't necessarily fit into the norm, although there are a lot of like micro kind of farmer florists like me out there these days.
Well, I think that's one of the helpful things that you do in the book. You have that part where you talk sort of like pigeonhole that pigeonholes the not the word I'm looking for, but like
there's a few scales that seem to work out. I think that's what you mean.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You talk about how there's, I forget what you call it, but it's like a micro farm where they're operating on very small acreage, but doing their own design work in getting that highest tier of pricing. And then there's like a medium sized farm that's maybe retailing and wholesaling more, but also has some employees. And then there's bigger farms that tend to be more mechanized, which I found, helpful, especially if somebody's either starting a new farm or experiencing some friction, like say trying to be a 2 or 3 acre farm all by themselves or themselves and a partner and wondering why they're working too much and never getting as much done. I thought that's help. Archetyping. It's almost like archetyping. Like there are certain, that's a much better word than pigeonholing. They're almost there, but that's a reality. I think is that there are certain, the combination of acreage goes along with certain sales channels and ways you're going to run a business. You're not going to run 100-acre farm all on retail, right? But so I think that's helpful for people. And I just think the book is a great resource, not only for people looking to start flower businesses, but for people to refine those businesses.
Right.
If you're in any way unhappy with the financials of your flower farm, get this book. There are so many useful tables and just ways to look at and analyze and understand your business. You'll make way more money than the cost of the book from the insights that it will give you. So speaking of the insights of an existing business, can you tell us a bit more about what it has been like starting over there in Oregon, right? Because you got B-Side Farm in California. You just fairly recently moved up to Oregon. And so, I mean, you more or less started back over. Can you tell us a bit about what that's been like to start your own business over?
Totally. Yeah. So we're coming up on November 1st, which is when we moved up here a year ago. So we've been here for a year.
Oh, so you're only a year in. Okay.
A year in. And yeah, it is a crazy thing to have done. Like, I don't talk about it that much because I don't know if I was insecure about talking about how insecure I felt as a new farmer in Oregon or whatever, but I think some of my experience could probably be helpful for others. But yeah, we were essentially priced out of California. I had leased like something like 5 different fields over the years. Some of them were tiny. Actually, Ellen Polishuk wrote an article about my farm for Growing for Market one year. And it started, it was like, I can't believe how much this person does on a small space, and she doesn't have any machinery. And she was just talking about how tiny it was, which is, yeah, it was. But so we leased a few different farms. My partner, Matt, is a chef, but during COVID, of course, he was out of work and started working with me, and I pulled him in more and more. So now he's sort of like taken over my job on the farm so that I can do my education stuff. So it's more like we're working towards him being full-time on the farm and me part-time on the farm. But we were finally in the position to start thinking about buying land. Mostly, like I said, because I took other work off the farm and then replaced myself on the farm. And then Matt's parents gave us 60 grand, which I think is like important to talk about because you hear about someone buying a farm and you wonder how that might have happened. So we definitely had some help from his parents, which was wonderful. So we started looking for land, and we like sort of looked in Sonoma County because we wanted to stay. Our community was there. Our well ran dry at the same time when we were starting to look for land. So it was like, okay, let's accelerate this process. We can't keep farming where we are. Of course, the well was replenished over the winter, but it was untenable as it was, like, to stay there. Is that a word?
Yeah.
No, that's a word.
Yeah. Untenable. Yeah.
Untenable. So we started looking, and I went to college up in Oregon, and my brothers live up here now, my family up here. So it just kind of made sense to look up here. And that's why we ended up coming to Oregon. It was way cheaper than, like, we just couldn't make it work in California. So we decided to move up here. And, I've been so busy with writing the book for the past 2 years that my mind was more in the education space than the space of my particular farm. And I don't know, I have to say that I didn't fully wrap my head around what a undertaking it was going to be. Not the move itself, which was a lot, but the building of a new farm, building a new market in Oregon. And it's not like I thought it was all going to be so easy and like people were going to be clamoring for my flowers up here. I didn't have any illusions like that, but I just didn't fully I think, appreciate the hard work I had done over almost 10 years to build my farm's reputation and customer base in California. So it's just huge, and also it's pretty rare. So our farm up here is on 2 acres. There's about 1 acre of growing space, which is actually enough for me, because tiny farms who are like, yeah, I'll come back to that. But so I was in this place where we were able to grow so much more than we're able to sell, which is interesting, because in California, I was in the opposite situation, but at the end I was buying in flowers for my weddings, and 10 grand, maybe 12 grand of flowers a year for the farm stand that I bought in from other farms, a minority of my flowers. But so it's like, that doesn't happen to most people. Most people are building up their farms and they're kind of growing acumen while they're building up their marketplace, and they grow somewhat in tandem, but that's not the case here. So trying to become known up here, and it's a crowded market as it was in Sonoma County. And I know all the farmers up here and they're amazing and they've embraced me. And so we started selling wholesale at the OFGA, the wholesale flower market here, which is wonderful, which wasn't my plan. Actually, I was like, we're going to bust into the retail market like I did in California, but that's going to take time. That's like word of mouth, one person at a time. So it's been hilarious, like writing a book this year about like my flower farming expertise, and then being like, does anyone want to buy my flowers? Like, I'm a new farmer in town. I'll tell you a story, which is, I don't think I've really told this, which is, one day I decided we weren't going to do farmers markets. We were going to like try to put some money into marketing. We were going to do like guerrilla marketing. We were going to just try to find new ways to get our flowers out there. It hasn't really happened, because it turns out I'm really busy and it's been an exhausting move and I haven't done much of this. But one day we had a bunch of extra flowers. I made up like, I'd like to say it was only 10 bouquets, but I'm going to guess it was like 50 bouquets. In the spring, I loaded up the van and I drove to a fancy neighborhood in Portland, and I made postcards. So I had these postcards made. I wish I had one to show you, that like advertised our summer CSA and had a QR code to how to sign up for it. And my goal was to hand out these bouquets for free and get people to sign up on my mailing list or for future CSAs. And I drove into the city and I parked in the neighborhood. I like found my first house. And I promptly had the closest thing to a panic attack I've ever had. I was like, what am I thinking? I'm going to go knock on this person's door. Like, they're going to think I'm selling something or Jesus or something. And like, I just was like, what was I even thinking? But I like somehow got it done and went and knocked on a few doors. It was like the first door, there was someone rude through a doorbell, didn't even come out. And I was like, I have some flowers for you. We're doing a promotion. Just wanted to spread the word about our farm. It's like, okay, leave them there. I'm like, okay, you're welcome. Thank you. So, and I kind of like crossed the street and went to a few different houses, had a few interactions, left some bouquets on doorsteps, and then drove away and was just like driving around Portland being like, this is not working. I am crazy. I should have like had a drink first, or I don't know, channeled some higher power, because this is horrible. And what was I thinking? And there's a reason people don't do this. And I went to a Whole Foods and like handed out some bouquets in the parking lot, because I was like, rich people go to Whole Foods. And so I came home and cried, and I came home and Matt opened the door to the van and saw like 40 bouquets remaining out of 50, and just like looked at me, and I was like, I don't want to talk about it. I can't talk about it. And so this is a story I was hoping to like share with my audience and my students and be like, look, you can do crazy things and see what works. But I didn't want to talk about it at all. But I will wrap up this long story to tell you that we were delivering our very, very small CSA this summer, and Matt usually delivers. But one day I was doing the delivery, and I walked up to a house and I knocked on the door to give them their bouquet. And I suddenly looked around and I recognized it as one of the houses that I had dropped a bouquet and a postcard at months earlier. And I was like, it worked. We got one customer. And the woman answered the door and we talked about it. And she was like, no, I had the worst day of my life. And I came home and there was a bouquet of flowers. And I've never bought flowers in my life, but now I'm your customer. And I was like, okay, like that $200 in revenue that came from my like 50 bouquets for free. All right, I'll take that,
If she stays your customer for 5 years, it'll have paid off like 5 times over. So no, that was a good story. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Every fall on our farm, we order a couple sling bags of Fort V potting soil from Vermont Compost. Over the years, we've tried a lot of the compost and potting soil options out there, from making our own to buying off the shelf. and we keep coming back to Vermont Compost, both for overall quality and batch to batch consistency. It's that consistency that keeps us coming back. There are so many variables that affect how good your seedlings are. We know Vermont Compost will give our plants the best possible foundation, so we can stick to worrying about all the other stuff and not the potting soil. With Vermont Compost Company's pre-buy program, you can receive 15% off on orders placed, paid for, and shipped by December 21st. Listeners of the Growing for Market podcast will receive an additional 5%, bringing the total discount to 20%. Visit vermontcompost.com/GFM for more details or mention this podcast when you place your order. If you're an experienced vegetable farmer, don't miss out on the 2024 Organic Vegetable Production Conference. In its 8th year, this conference fills that expert-level niche you're looking for. Farmer presenters share the nitty-gritty details of their production practices and also speak on a wide range of topics, from fertilizer injectors and pest management with beneficials to seed saving and labor retention. With online sessions on January 25th and 26th and in-person sessions on February 2nd and 3rd in Madison, Wisconsin, you can plug in no matter where you are. Register today at tinyurl.com/26285AX5 or just search Organic Vegetable Production Conference, University of Wisconsin, and you'll find it. And now, back to the show. Speaking of marketing, though, you talk about your involvement with the North Bay Flower Collective when you were in California. Talk about the differences between a collective, cooperative, and hubs as different ways growers can group together to sell flowers. Can you talk a bit about your involvement with and evolution of that group over the years as a way for listeners to think about the differences between those cooperative growing structures if they don't want to just knock on doors and drop off bouquets?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. So the North Bay Flower Collective was incredible. So it was a group that really got started by Hedda Brorstrom of Full Bloom Farm, a good friend of mine, a Castfest friend of mine, who was like, there's a few of us growing flowers around here. Let's get together and talk. And it eventually became a group with farmers and florists. And we eventually formed into a group with like kind of a board of directors, and Danielle, who has Jolie Blooms, another great friend, really took along a lot of the leadership, as did Jordan. So, it was just these key players who kept this group going and growing over the year. I was more just like a member rather than an active leader in it. But we looked for ways to do better as a local industry. We had a flower festival one year. Zoe at Front Porch Farm hosted that. It was awesome. We just became this sort of entity, and we thought about forming a cooperative to sell together. It looked like that was too confusing and complicated, and we were all coming from different places and had different capacities for involvement. So one florist in the group, Nicole from California Sister, who really came up with the idea, went ahead and started what was called the Sonoma Flower Mart, where it changed, had different iterations over the year, but basically we would sell together cooperatively. And we were trying to get florists to be able to come buy from us rather than driving down to the hour and a half to San Francisco to buy flowers that like we sent down there to sell. It was wonderful. And it was, it's interesting because a lot of us already had these relationships with these florists. So we were selling to most of these customers already, but banding together did kind of ease the process on everyone. I think in other areas, so we've seen since that happened, I'm not saying we started it, but just since then, there's been this humongous growth of different methods of cooperative selling. And I think the potential is even greater in areas where you might be a newer farmer or you're really limited in your capacity to market and sell to florists or to get out there and deliver. And so kind of selling with these cooperatives is a great way to not only kind of increase awareness of your product and increase your customer base, but also just take all that selling time off the table. And, platforms like Gather Flora and Rooted Farmers are now working with collectives and cooperatives all over the country to help these little farms do better by essentially taking the selling and the marketing time off of the farmers' back and doing it for them. So yeah, it's been really awesome to see for sure.
Okay. Well, one of the things you talk about in the book is you make a distinction how a farmer / florist can gross maybe 4 times as much on the same footprint as someone just selling flowers. But of course, to be successful at being a farmer florist, a person has to be skilled not just in the flowers, but also in arranging and have some way to sell the finished product, i.e. bouquets, wedding work, etc., to the public. That may involve investment in additional infrastructure like a storefront, employees, etc. So as usual, gross can be higher, but so can expenses for a farmer florist than growing flowers. Do you have any pieces of advice for people choosing between farmer or farmer florist, other than you've really got to know how to arrange and sell flowers to the public to be a farmer florist?
Right. Yeah. So the amount of gross revenue you're bringing in this context all depends on how much added value there is to your flowers, how much value you're adding, and then how many times you can mark the flowers up. So, of course, it's different in different areas, but for the most part, there's this kind of like baseline. I think of the wholesale to florist price as sort of a baseline price. So let's say that might be $10 for a bunch of zinnias. Like if you're selling to a wholesaler or grocery, it's going to be marked down from that. But let's take that kind of base price of $10. In a lot of locations, if you're selling to a retail customer, either through a farmer's market or some other way or a CSA, maybe you're marking up that price 2 times. So maybe you're then charging $20 for that bunch of flowers. Usually there's a design component, so it's not really a bunch of flowers. It's different stems in a mixed bouquet. And then if you're selling at a more like high-end retail way, maybe doing a pop-up or something, maybe you can mark up 3 times. So like my farm stand, I was marking up 3 times. For weddings, full service weddings where you're doing the design and probably the delivery and the setup, which is the way a lot of us do it, you're marking up your flowers more like 4 or 5 times. Again, this depends on your area, but that's what most studio-based or home-based florists who are not farmer florists would be doing. They're marking up anywhere from 3 to 5 times. And then there's sometimes other design fees, whatever, on top of that. But yeah, this was the case for most of my weddings, which after a few years, I was up to like a $6,000 minimum for my full service wedding. So someone needed to be spending $6,000 on flowers with me or on a design package with me to do that. I tried to bring in like $100,000 a year through weddings. And at first that was like 30 weddings. And then that was like 15 weddings by the end, or 10 weddings, 12, something like that. It's a whole other job. That's the thing. I mean, there's things about being a florist that are so wonderful compared to farming. You can really keep track of your expenses and your labor. It's more cut and dry in that way. It's predictable. You can plan for the profit you want. However, it's just a whole other job and it's a whole other mindset, and you have to love it. And I kind of don't love it. I love floral design. I love the mechanics of making the wedding fit together, but I don't love talking about linens. I never, ever, ever want to talk about anyone's dress or like makeup. Like I wanted to shoot myself every time I had to talk about this stuff. And I just didn't, I was like, is my life's purpose to be in the events industry? I really don't think so. But it was a way to make more money on a small scale, and I was good at it. And so it became this like goal of mine to like make my wedding business really work. So I think if a farmer is looking into getting into more design, I mean, if you're really limited on space or on time, getting that higher, more on space than on time, but getting that higher price point is seductive. If you just are farming in your backyard, this is where I want people to look at their like top line sales projections, which for bigger farms doesn't tell the whole story because you can be spending as much money as you're bringing in. But for small farms, looking at how they're going to make it work, tiny farms, you have to look at what's your revenue ceiling, I guess I would say, or like how much could you even bring in even if you were doing everything right? And if you're on a 1/4 acre selling wholesale, that's never going to support you. That's never going to bring in enough money. So marking up those flowers 3 or 4 or 5 times can do it. But I'd say you have to love it. You have to be interested in it. You have to be interested in becoming a good designer and coordinating a lot of details with wedding couples. And it's not horrible in the way people think it's horrible. Like bridezillas aren't typically a thing. I've met them, but they're not. It's other things that will beat you down about being a florist. But it's not easier than farming. It's just different. And it's a whole different job.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, you got a really great chart in the book, the one where you talk about a stem, let's say being $1. And then if you sell it, you've got all these different channels of where it could go. And you talk about how the price changes. And I can't remember if it goes up 10 times. I don't think it's that much, but it goes up a lot. I think your highest sales channel, correct me if I'm wrong, is weddings.
Yeah.
So, like you take that one stem, it's going to bring the most gross to you, at a wedding. And likewise, it's going to be less than $1 if you're wholesaling it, but you're going to have all this other investment, in dealing with the bride and dealing with the wedding and everything if you're getting that high dollar. And I think once again, the value there is not so much to steer people in any particular direction other than for them to figure out what the right channel is. Because I think people tend to get hung up on size in a way. It's like, oh, we need more small farms or we need more big farms. We just need more farms. I think personally.
Yeah.
I'm reminded we had Ben Hartman on a couple weeks ago. He was talking about this book that he wrote, The Lean Micro Farm. And I didn't know this, but he had shrunk his farm down to 1/3 of an acre.
Wow.
And he even had doubts about whether they could do it. And part of it was lifestyle, so they could spend more time with their kids and things like that. But they were able to shrink their farm down to already what a lot of people would consider a fairly small farm, shrink it from an acre down to 1/3 of an acre without taking a pay cut. And so I think that's the value of your book, is that it can help people understand those things of, like, if they either really want to be on a small scale or only have access to a tiny piece of land. It's not that you can do it, but you probably got to be, heavily involved in retail or something like weddings,
or agritourism. Yeah.
There's demand for weddings out there. Yeah. It should be people who realize that there are those kind of people who want to do that kind of thing who should be doing it, and not people, and maybe if you're more geared, you just want to spend a day on your tractor and hanging out with your flowers. Maybe you should be wholesaling. So, I think that's one of the values of your book, is it can help people figure out really where they should be, so they spend less time gritting their teeth doing things that they don't enjoy and can spend more time probably doing the things that brought them to farming in the first place. So,
yeah.
So very cool. I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but I've got to ask, why has there been so much growth in flower farms lately? Okay. What I mean by that is, so for example, it just seems like, on social media, it seems like here at Growing for Market, we're just getting more signups from people with flower farm in the name or something like that. Like, it just seems like, I think it's great, obviously, but do you have any idea why there's been so much growth in flower farms lately?
Yeah, it's such tremendous growth. It's wild. And it's really interesting to wonder whether and when the bubble's going to pop and when what that's going to look like. But yeah, I think a lot of it, Lynn Basinski's book saved everyone's butts. Like, anyone who was just thinking about what to do and what to grow, how to grow flowers. I've heard so many farmer mentors of mine have said, I didn't know other people were doing this, or I didn't know this was an option. And then Lynn Basinski's book came out, which is wonderful. But then more recently, I'd say like 15 years ago, Floret has done so much Aaron Benzicane has done so much to excite people about flowers and get people on board with this kind of flower farming as a lifestyle and flower gardening as a lifestyle. But yeah, the ASCFG has seen such tremendous growth in the past few years. And I think the rise of social media, and obviously what we do is such a visual medium, like it's kind of synonymous with this lifestyle that feels a little bit nostalgic, or it looks nostalgic. And yeah, so when I was starting to flower farm, I read Floret's blog. I read Jenny Love's blog. That was, 15 years ago when I started getting excited about it. And there's just been so many great resources ever since. And it's so addictive. Like, when I think most people will say this, when you start growing flowers, for me, it was a passion like I had never had for anything else in my life. And I felt like I was someone who was never going to find a passion. And then I became obsessed, and I wouldn't call myself obsessed anymore. It's what I do. It's what grounds me. It's what I love. But no, I'm not like staying up all night reading flower books anymore. But it's addictive, and it does so much for your mental health. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of learning from other people, in the book, you talk about how we're so connected these days, partially due to social media, and flowers are, of course, beautiful. So they're begging to have their pictures taken and shared, which can contribute to a lot of people growing the same things, since people post it and other people follow their lead. But in the book, you talk about how you grew peonies in a marginal peony growing area to set yourself apart. And you talk about how people who have exceptional climates for their region, either exceptionally cold or hot, can leverage those differences to, say, grow cool season flowers longer than those around them. Can you talk a bit about how those situations and other good ways for growers to set themselves apart through crop selection?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so there's not always going to be a crop that allows you to specialize and like carve out your niche. It's not always going to be crop dependent, but the examples where it can happen are really telling and awesome. So for me with peonies, I was in California zone 9B on the border of where peonies were known to do well. Basically, I mean, there's a lot of, we know that peonies do better with deeper, longer cold period in the winter. The number of chill hours that peonies need, it's sort of, the jury's still out. I mean, some people, chill hours are defined in very specific ways, as like fruit growers will know, but it was a little bit of an unknown. Most people were like, oh, you can't grow peonies in California. There are some people who have been doing it for a long time. But so I started just becoming really fascinated by that and thinking, I'm going to do it. No one's growing peonies on a large scale. It was in the North Bay, but in the greater Bay Area, maybe there was one farm. But so I wanted to do it. I wanted to try. I did some tests on one of my plots for a few years. Like I did grow peonies for a few years, but I was just at that point really sick of selling wholesale on such a small scale. I was sick of sending out availability lists, growing the same thing as everyone else. My florists who supported me, if they could buy my foxglove, or they could probably buy the same foxglove from 5 other farms, and it was just as good and it was the same price and whatever. So I was like, I want to just do something that is streamlined and easy. So I leased another half acre, and all that entailed, getting this ground, doing a year of cover cropping, buying the peonies, doing all the research. And I planted 3,000 peony plants on a half acre, which is a lot of peonies. It's a lot. Most people will kind of invest in like 500 at a time, or really small farmers 100 at a time while they build their peony stock. But I was like, I'm going all in. I think it cost me to plant out that field like 20 grand or 25 grand all in, which at the time was like huge. Now I'm like, yeah, I don't have that money these days, but it doesn't seem like a lot of money to me these days. I just paid 2 grand to have a tree cut down yesterday, but back then when I had no assets or liabilities, I guess, like it was a big deal to save up and get that field planted. And the peonies, they did okay. I mean, the end of the story is that I think they had some more disease than they would have if they had been in a colder zone. And some of the varieties were certainly not as productive as I'd like them to be. But I was able to do things I could never do before. I started a peony CSA, and my CSA never really did very well. Like if I did a summer CSA, I would get like 15 customers or something. My peony CSA sold out at 100 customers, and it was wonderful. And I was charging delivery fees that I know customers think are expensive, but I was charging the same as what a florist might charge for a delivery fee, like $25 if we went down to San Francisco. And it was this thing that I was able to market. I was able to become known for it. And it was a way to get new customers excited about something that they couldn't find locally because other small farms were not growing peonies. And another good example is Ardelia Farm. Farmer Bailey plugs now, they have since moved to Portugal, but they were a farm in Vermont. And they could grow sweet peas. I don't know if it was all through the summer, but like deep into the summer. Whereas obviously sweet peas are more of a spring crop in most other places, but their cool temperatures allowed them to, and I think other specific things to their climate allowed them to grow wonderful sweet peas. So they really invested in it. They did the cordon method, which is like, more about than I do, specific greenhouse stuff. I still don't understand. You like lay the sweet pea vine down and then you clip off everything except for one, I don't know. But so, and they started selling them into the New York market. So they would like deliver really far or ship them really far away, but it was because they were able to specialize in it. So I think it's just really worth looking at the nuances of your specific microclimate or your skill set and see how you can stand apart from other farms. It's interesting because it's advice that sort of conflicts with the like stay in your lane advice, but I think you can be doing both things at once. I think you can be seeing what your unique value proposition is while also not being worried about what other people are doing, because farms will come and go. Like you and I've seen so many farms open and then close, and so there's no need to be threatened by other farms, but there's a need to try to do something different, especially in a crowded market, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what your book is for, right, Lenny? I mean, seriously though, that's people. I feel like, that's what we did when as speaking me and my farming partner and my wife. I wish that we had read a book like yours, before we started our farm. We just worked on other people's farms. We apprenticed for a few years, and we're just like, well, we worked on farms in, like Pennsylvania, California, Washington State, Virginia, New York, and Maine. So, like we know what there's to know. We should just start a farm.
Right.
We were more or less successful we're still operating, but I feel like it was, we didn't have a projection is what it was. We weren't like, oh, this is where it's going to come from. We just figured that our know-how and passion would carry us through. We would, and we would just grow stuff and learn from our mistakes. It would have been, in retrospect, it would have been much better if we followed your advice, made a business plan, at least figured out where the money was going to come from, so that if any of it didn't work out, we could say like, oh, that wasn't as good. We should do a different sales channel or something like that. So
yeah.
Actually, something you said earlier reminded me of something from when we were farming up in Washington State. We were there late enough into the season that we got to go to, I don't know if they're still doing this, but I think it was when Washington and Oregon Tilth had their conference combined.
Oh, cool.
And I think that situation may have changed. This was 18 years ago. Am I really that old? I guess I am.
Somehow.
And so, yeah. But I remember I went to this presentation with this old farmer who was like, I walk around before every market and see what everybody else is pricing at, and I set my price 20% higher than whatever the highest price
Love
is.
that.
Because,
Love
you
that.
talk about in your book how one of the temptations, especially when you're new, is to race to the bottom, is to try to, get in the door by having prices lower than anybody else. And you talk extensively about pricing, and you say in the book, I aim to make sure that B-Side is always pricing our flowers either at or hopefully above the going rate. Can you talk a little bit about why that is and how you get prices above the going rate?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because all these new farmers know enough now to know that they should know something about their cost of production and how that factors into their pricing, which in a minute we can talk about my grant funded research for cost of production stuff. But so everyone knows that, yet no one knows their cost of production. Everyone is basing their prices off of like some, they call it competitor based pricing, like some version of your prices in relation to other local prices. And it's so hard because if we were to base our prices solely off of cost of production and some like intended profit, we would probably be asking for more money than people are willing to pay. And it would affect our volume of sales. We wouldn't be able to sell as many of that flower if we were charging that high of a price. So quite honestly, our prices are very dependent on what the local rate is, especially on a wholesale level. With retail, you can have more flexibility based on how good of a marketer you are, the experience you're creating for your customer, whatever. But on wholesale level, when people ask me how to price their flowers, I mean, the old advice, and it's still what you should do, is to get on the mailing list of local wholesalers or flower distributors. So in California, I was always on the list for the big wholesalers at the San Francisco market. And it would give me a sense of what other florists were paying for flowers. So if they were paying $15 for a bunch of delphinium, I would be fairly confident that I could at least price my delphinium at $15. But if I had a hunch that mine was better, taller, last longer, fresher, or that this florist really stood behind hyper local product, then I could know, or I could test out getting away with a slightly higher price. But I think a good baseline and a starting place is at least not charging less than what is offered locally in your area. So it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, well, that's good advice. And I think that's a good segue to talking about your grant work, because there is a lot of information in your chapter on crop profitability and cost of production. I was particularly excited to hear about your work with Know Your Cost to Grow, KYCTG. We just happened to have an article in the November-December Growing for Market magazine by Josh Volk, who is the partner of Tanya Murray, who is the one who has been developing KYCTG, Know Your Cost to Grow, for the last 10 years, which we didn't plan this, but Might as well have, because it's really great. By the time this interview is out, the November December magazine will be the current one. And so that's, I know from the book, that's also something that you're involved in. Can you tell us about your work with Know Your Cost to Grow, what growers will be interested in it, and when they can get involved with that?
Yeah, definitely. So I have created a little career for myself of being a researcher in like the flower farming business benchmarking space, based on applying for grants and getting those grants and then doing this research. So it started as a Western SARE grant, their farmer rancher grant, which is so wonderful. And it's typically used for farmers to do research on their own farms. Often it's more crop related, like they're testing out things in the field or IPM or something. But I did my first grant with them to try to start getting at larger financial benchmarking in the flower farming space, and then cost of production, because there's so much data we don't have. I mean, in all farming industries, I don't think we have that much, but flower farming specifically, we have no yield data. Like there's no standards of how many, or very little rather, of like how many stems a zinnia plant will produce. There's some great stuff in the specialty cut flowers book and also in NC State studies and ASCFG studies over the years, but we need a lot more. And there's also not much data around like what we talked about, gross sales numbers, net margin percentages. It's just like, we don't know what we're looking at. And so I was like, how can we start to look at that? So my first grant was just working with like 4 other farmers. And then this year, I'm almost done with the second year of my new grant, which is a professional and producer grant. So I applied for this grant as like the researcher, and I'm working with 10 farms. And the biggest component of it is Know Your Cost to Grow, which I'll say more about. And the other component is a financial benchmark study. And my like mentor in that space is John Hendrickson, who I brought in from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think that's right. He is wonderful. He's a farm viability specialist, as is Tanya Murray. And so I have these 2 like awesome all-stars, great thinkers in the farming space working with me. And I feel so lucky. And now I'm wrapping up. This weekend will be spent wrapping up my other grant application to disseminate all this research through a new grant. So Know Your Cost to Grow. Yeah. As I wanted to study cost of production on flower farms, there are a few different routes I could have gone. And we've talked about Richard Wiswall's book, which is just so incredible. And he's the one who really got the idea of enterprise budgets or cost of production studies on the minds of farmers, and has some really, really detailed, really amazing information. It's so hard for farmers to do this, though, to do it at all. And most farmers have not looked at their cost of production. So I was like, I had phone calls with people in Vermont who have done awesome cost of production analyses over there. And then I found Tanya Murray, who I'd known about. And she developed this program, Know Your Cost to Grow. So it was actually the OSU Center for Small Farms in collaboration with Oregon Tilth, and Tanya Murray, like at the helm, developed this program over many years. And it's like a course essentially, but it includes an online tool for tracking and studying your cost of production on specific crops. It was developed for vegetables, but we've been doing it with flowers. And the main distinguishing feature is that Tanya's like, the big piece is labor. Yeah, we can talk about the inputs of your farm. You can drill down into how much a yard of compost costs and how much of that compost you're spreading on your zinnia crop. But labor is the big piece. And some of the kind of like simplified methods out there of tracking your cost of production just treat labor as like one line item, not Richard Wiswall, but like other one. It's like, oh, and then how many hours of labor went into this crop? And it's like, that's impossible to know. That's impossible to track with any accuracy. And labor makes or breaks all these crops, right? So the Know Your Cost to Grow program specifically takes advantage of or leverages the fact that for a lot of the crops we grow, many of the processes or the tasks that we perform on those crops are going to take the same amount of time regardless of the crop. So accounting for different spacing and all that in the field, tilling a bed, hula hoeing a bed, knife weeding a bed, like it kind of doesn't depend on what the crop is. So there's a way to do some time studies and get at rates for those. And then when it comes to specific things, specifically harvest is so different from one crop to the next. You're more focusing on one crop at a time. But it's a way of kind of bringing farms into this program, getting them to more easily track their data on their farm, and teach them about how different their crops are and how some crops are really supporting the other ones. And there's some, if there's crops that are consistently losing you money after doing this study, it's time to cut them out. And if there's some crops that are kind of like in the middle, it's time to either see how you can improve production on those or cut them out altogether. And yeah, working with Tanya has been incredible. So I'm sort of like the coach and the project manager for this project. I'm calling the farmers every month. We're having Zooms. We're going through their crops. And then Tanya is like the overall, she's the mastermind. She's, she helps us fine tune the nitty gritty problems and then kind of gets everyone oriented into the program and has kind of been holding my hand. I felt like her like assistant in this project at times. And I'm just so lucky she's worked with us because she's awesome.
Yeah, well, it sounds, from reading Josh's article, which will be out in November, it sounds really great. So people can read more about Know Your Cost to Grow in the November, December magazine. And part of the reason, it's coming is because it's Know Your Cost to Grow is going to be live. Is it in January?
I'm excited to read Josh's article too. I've actually learned a lot from him as well. Depending on, basically they're figuring out what the next iteration is going to be, how much support and hand-holding is preferable and appropriate and like necessary for farmers going through this project. So I think there's a new cohort opening up in January. I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Read the article, folks, for the details. I just read it to get it in the magazine, but that's why it's written down, right? Because I forget exactly what the details are, but the details are in the magazine. It sounds like a really great program just as far as, it's like, how the heck do you figure out if you're profitable on any given crop if you don't have any idea how much it costs you to grow it? So I think that's really like a really important program that's going to be valuable for a lot of growers coming this winter.
Yeah.
All right, Lenny. There's so much in this book. It's almost pointless to ask, what is your advice for flower farmers? Because you just spent 259 pages putting your great ideas down on paper. But I know you've worked with a lot of different growers. For beginners, what is, I don't know what to say, a most common beginner mistake you see people making? Or perhaps, to put it a kinder way, what is something beginners tend to miss that they should really focus on? Other than going and getting your book, do you have any advice for beginners in particular?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. This term just came into my head yesterday. I was talking with another local grower and we were lamenting, how many farms go out of business. And one farmer we both know who has been really scaling up and doing great is going out of business because it's just a little too hard. There's so many hurdles to making a farm work, right? And I realized that what I've been trying to say, what I spent, 259 pages trying to say, is that there's a lot of magical thinking in farming. Like just as you described, when you and your wife first started your farm, you're doing a little bit of everything. You're working, you know how to grow plants, but you're like, it'll work out. It'll work out. Yeah. You haven't done sales projections. You haven't looked at how much you are working, what that means to kind of exploit your own labor and probably your body and your skin and, all the things that start to fall apart after a decade of farming. But it's magical thinking. It's like by putting my head down and doing the same thing over and over, like it's going to pan out. It's just going to pan out. I'm going to keep flower farming and it's going to work out. It'll come together. The plan will solidify. And the thing is that it doesn't happen. And it takes most farmers until like 3-5 years to really start to look at their numbers, understand their numbers, and make that plan. But by then, a lot of them are already burned out. And so I think it's a bit dangerous. There's a lot that can be lost in that time when you're burning out. And so I guess my advice for beginners is to just realize that it's never too early to start learning these business skills alongside your growing skills. Sure, there needs to be a year or two, depending on your background, of trying out some different crops, trying out some different sales channels, learning how to be a farmer. But the sooner you can approach it with kind of a scientific mindset of like, I'm going to try X, Y, and Z out. I'm going to define what success would look like. If I'm trying out a farmer's market, I'm going to define what success would look like. And if I don't reach that success, it's time to cut it and try something else. So my advice is read the business book. No, just kidding. But it's like, it's never too early to start approaching your farm as a business endeavor with this kind of entrepreneurial mindset of strategizing. And for more experienced farmers, I think people should be asking for more help. I think farmers who are 7, 8, 9, 10 years in, whatever, more than that, should be finding a way to take a step back from their farm, get some help if they need it, get some help from someone like Julia Shanks or, Ellen Polishuk, who's working with farms to help them do better, and not be afraid to make big changes, to cut out crops that you've been growing for 20 years and your customers love, but they aren't making you money, to like do those little fine tuning, little things or big things to fine tune to help your farm do better for longer. Yeah, I think there's just so many farmers have been farming so hard for so long that they don't have the capacity to step back, make changes, and they don't have the confidence that making a bunch of little tweaks will lead to big results. And that's the crux of this cost of production work. It's like you're growing crops that are losing your money. You're selling through sales channels that are losing you money. I know Julia Shanks has worked to create this like opportunity assessment where you can compare the costs of selling through one sales channel with another. And Dan Brisbois, is that how you say his last name? I know he does this like year-end review that I think he just did, and he shares Julia's assessment, or she works with him, and it's just an invaluable thing for growers. So they should check those resources out. But yeah, even experienced farmers can be doing a lot better, which is not, I'm not nagging on them. There's so many farmers that I'm sure I could never work as hard or as long as I look up to these people so much, but rather than saying you could be doing better, it's like, let's find ways to help your life be a little bit easier, because it's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah. And part of that is just being in business too. Is that right? I mean, I've heard the statistic, I forget what it is, but you've probably seen it too, about like X number of new businesses fail within the first 5 years. It's a big number, it's daunting. People should be aware of that. I don't think it should stop anybody from going into business. And I'm glad you brought up the Dan Brisbois article, because we did just within the last year in the magazine, Growing for Market magazine, we ran an article by Dan Brisbois about his year-end review. So that stuff, great article that Growing for Market subscribers have access to in the archives. Even if they weren't getting the magazine at that time, it's all there in the archives. They should loop back and check that out. Actually, I mean, this just yesterday, somebody tagged us on social media and said that they did their year-end review early and mentioned that article by Dan Brisbois, and they tagged Growing for Market. And that's, like, there's good things on social media, there's bad things on social media, but it's really, that's really cool I love that, when to see people calling out the good things that they get. So that was fun to see. But I think that it does have to be kept in mind that some percentage of any businesses that go out of business. And I think, I don't know, farming might even be harder just because you have all the vagaries of weather and pests and inflation and all kinds of things. I guess inflation affects all kinds of business, but not all businesses are affected by, say, like a really bad weather year, a really bad pest year. When things already aren't going well, can be enough to tank some businesses. It happens.
I have this little video now that runs in my mind, and it's describing what you just said. Maybe one day I'll be able to figure out how to make a real video, but it's like a little icon of a stick figure, like businessman or businesswoman walking down the street with a briefcase. And it's like, farming is just like any other small business, but then suddenly they're like pelted with hail and they're burned by the sun and they trip over a log and the crops die and there's a tidal wave and then there's a drought. And it's like, farming is not just small. It's like small business out in the elements, with all these other things thrown at you. It's wild. It's a crazy thing to do. Like, we're all crazy. And I'm so proud of farmers who make it work, and farmers who also decide that it's not for them. That's fine, but it's just, I love our industry, and it's just so full of so many challenges. And that's why I feel so excited to help in any way that I can. And Growing for Market, like, hallelujah,
Yeah. Well, I think your book is going to do a lot. I think the best time for somebody to read your book would be before they even start. I would say, if you're out there, you're listening to this, maybe you're apprenticing on someone's farm, maybe you're working a part-time job, working part-time on a farm, maybe you're working a full-time job, taking someone's farming course online or something. Like, the time really to read Lenny's book is now. because it would be so much better to start a farm business with a plan than to just start growing things, like we did and see what sticks.
Right.
That said, I do think that your book has so much analysis that it can also help people figure out how to, who are in those middle stages, figure out how to be more profitable, figure out which crops are losing them money. They can cut them out and stay profitable and stay in business. So, like, I think your book is going to help people stay in business. So
thank you
for that. Thank you, Lenny. It's hard to be an entrepreneur. Give yourself all the advantages that you can, one of which is your book, if you're a flower farmer. We've taken a lot of your time already, Lenny. I really appreciate it. But I did want to ask you, I know you're about to launch a couple things that may not even be live yet by the time this interview runs or not, but you can tell us more about this. Can you tell us about what's next for you?
Yeah, thank you. It's I've been trying to find a way. So the book has taken my past 2 years, and now that's done. And so now I've moved into putting all my kind of like business teaching together into an online course, which the fact that this online course is going to exist does not mean that I think everyone needs to buy a big online course in order to be a good farmer. Not at all. But some people love learning in this way. I love teaching in this way. When I used to teach, be adjunct faculty at Santa Rosa JC, I had to move to teaching online during COVID, as everyone did. And it was an uphill battle, but I started to find really things I loved about online teaching. And so I'm kind of combining this business retreat that I taught last year, but live online through Zoom, into more of a self-paced, like module-based business course, which somewhat goes through the chapters of my book, but it goes way beyond too. It's going to be like 15 hours around there of content, a big course for people to take over the winter. So that'll be open for registration in December, and people can sign up for the wait list now. So I just made my new website live, which is flowerfarmingforprofit.com. There are kinks, I'm sure. I've been working on it. But so that's out there. So the course is going to be a great way to apply some of these concepts, to learn about everything from sales projections to email marketing, and kind of get this nitty gritty stuff that is sometimes hard to find in the farming industry, and then have lots of worksheets and templates and take-home work, as well as kind of a group coaching component. And then I also do group coaching. So actually this Sunday and Monday is one of my monthly group coaching sessions with a group of farmers. I work with people in groups of 6 to 8 people. We meet once a month on Zoom, go through different topics, but mostly we're there to share and encourage and fine-tune people's specific problems. So we're really able to focus on one person at a time and provide some support from me and also from the other people in the group. And it's something that I've loved. It's like my favorite thing to do is meet with these groups. And so I'm planning to do more of them next year, so that you can also sign up for that on my website. And those will start in January. But yeah, the website is also, I'm hoping to build more and more resources there. I have some resources about different grants you can find and apply for as flower farmers, an intro to bookkeeping, stuff like that. I'd love to think of it as like a clearinghouse for flower farming business education. Yeah, and thanks. I'm confident that the book will help a lot of people. I'm thrilled to have written it. I'm so grateful to all my mentors who helped out with it, and grateful to you for your place in this industry and for taking over Growing for Market and launching it into this new era and growing it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lenny. I mean, the podcast in particular has been a fun new project because we get to talk to fun people like yourself. But it just keeps conversation going off the page in a different way than we can in the magazine. And I'm glad that you and other people have made online courses and things like that. Because I was just thinking about this. Is that I realized I had my first full-time farm job in 2003. Mm-hmm. It's 20 years ago, believe it or not. There were no online courses at that time. That's part of the reason that, in fact, I met my wife working on one of those farms, and she calls it doing the apprentice circuit. We moved around the country working on farms, and what we did is we worked on farms in the summertime, and we came back and we had desk jobs that we did in the wintertime to try to like save the money and everything. There was no such thing as, is taking a farm course. And luckily, we were able to do that and kind of like balance the learning versus the money making aspect by doing, desk work in the wintertime. But, I know not everybody can do that. And so I'm glad, it's a cool thing that this whole thing of like online courses that didn't even exist,
Yeah.
wasn't even an option for me when we started working on farms, is out there, because I think, different people have different learning styles and different availabilities and things like that.
Yes.
So maybe if they can't, some people like to read a book, some people want to take an online course. It's great. And I also wanted to mention that a few of the farmers that you talk about in the book have been on the podcast, just to quickly call them out. We had Mima and Miranda from Urban Buds, I think back in September. Joanna from Bluma,
Yep.
who you do a detailed analysis of her moving from farmers markets to wholesale market back in the spring. We had Gretel and Steve Adams of Sunny Meadows Flower Farm. So if readers are interested in hearing more about some of the people that Lenny talks about in the book, go check those podcasts out.
Yeah.
They're in the archive. And I did touch on, but a non-flower grower that you talk about, Ben Hartman, you mentioned him in his leaning up the farm, or basically trying to make farm systems more efficient in the book. He was on the pod just a couple weeks ago. His episode is definitely worth listening to. Actually, his episode hasn't played yet, but by the time this episode is out, his will have been a couple weeks ago. So Ben Hartman is in our archives as well if you want to make your farm more efficient. So go check out those. And one thing that just occurred to me while we were talking is that we'll make the article that Ellen wrote about your farm when it was in California. We'll go ahead and make that public and put it in the show notes, because I think that would be a really interesting snapshot, since we've been talking about how you just moved your farm. We can kind of through the GFM archives, we can peer into the past, and then we'll all be just staying tuned to see what's in the future for Lenny and B-Side. Okay.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thanks for all your support and all you do for our industry.
Yeah, sure. Oh, the very last thing though, Lenny, where can people find you online, on social media, wherever else you want people to look you up?
Oh yeah, thanks. Instagram, flower farming, for profit, and then B-Side Farm, but the first one is better for farmers, and then flowerfarmingforprofit.com. Yeah. And yeah, I'm just to encourage people to if you're interested in the book, pre-orders do help us. So pre-ordering it from Growing for Market is perfect. I encourage you guys to do that as soon as possible. It lets the printer, it basically dictates like how many copies are going to be printed. So it's the best way to support an author is to do pre-order, and do that through Growing for Market. Yeah.
Yeah, magazine subscribers always get 20% off all books, including yours. So yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if it's as big as the discount Amazon is offering. We definitely can't compete with their volumes. On the other hand, that's something Lynn, who started the magazine 32 years ago, she always did, was to do a discount for subscribers. So, magazine subscribers always do get 20% off, whether they pre-order it or order it. All the books are 20% off on Growing for Market website, or if you call in and mention you're a subscriber. So that's true. It is very helpful for everybody to pre-order. So just go pre-order it. Then you just pre-order it. Then you don't have to even think about it anymore. Then one day in January, this package is going to come from Growing for Market.
Yeah.
You'll be like, hey, it's Lenny's book. So just do it. Your January self will thank your now self. You just go do it now. So
just do
all
it.
right, Lenny, this has been a blast. I really enjoyed this conversation. And also I really enjoyed the book. I definitely learned some things there. So thank you. Thank you for that. And take care. And, maybe you'd be kind enough to come back on the podcast in a couple of years and tell us about how it's going out in Oregon.
I'd love to. Yeah. If I have time for the little people when my farm is like thriving. No, just kidding. I'll be in the same position. I would love to. This has been a blast. I really appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. We'd even take one of your minions if you get to that point. You can have the person that you contract all your interviews out to. Okay, so we take it either way. But all right, well, it's been fun. Thank you so much, Lenny, and thank you for the book. We'll look forward to catching up with you at some point in the future.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine subscription for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never get billed. Even the most basic subscription gets you a year of the magazine, plus 150 back issues from the last 15 years. With digital subscriptions starting at just $30 per year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.